The morning started like any other. The kettle whistled, the floorboards groaned, and the sun came through the kitchen window in long, dusty bands. I poured my coffee, black as always, and looked toward the bookshelf. The spot where my late wife's old Leica had sat for years, polished once a month, never touched by anyone but me. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon, so you never miss a story like this one. That small camera had been the last thing she held before the hospital took her in. She'd been framing the backyard lilacs through that square little viewfinder, her hands trembling, smiling anyway. After the funeral, I hung the strap over its lens like a curtain. It felt like she was still seeing the world from there. But that morning, the shelf was bare. At first, I thought maybe I'd moved it while cleaning. But I don't misplace things. I never have. Years of teaching shop class drilled that into me. A tool has a home and it stays there. The empty rectangle of dust on the wood looked like a small wound. I called out, "Hey, anyone seen the camera?" Silence. Then a shuffle of feet upstairs, a door closing. My son and his family had moved back in 2 months earlier. "Just until we get back on our feet," he'd said. I told him it was fine, that a house built for laughter shouldn't stay too quiet. But quiet would have been better than what filled it now. Voices through walls, heavy footsteps, and arguments whispered into phones. When I asked again, my son came down the stairs, half-buttoned shirt, eyes avoiding mine. "What camera, Dad?" "You know what camera," I said. "The Leica, your mother's." He glanced toward the living room where his wife stood pretending to fold laundry. "Oh, that. Don't worry about it, we—" Something in his voice tightened. I put my cup down slow. "You what?" He took a deep breath, forced a smile that looked more like pain. "We pawned it, Dad. Just for a little while. We needed some quick cash. I'll buy it back when the next check clears." The room went still, even the kettle stopped hissing. "You pawned your mother's camera," he shrugged. "It's just an old thing. We figured—" I didn't let him finish. I grabbed my jacket, keys jangling like loose change in a life I suddenly didn't recognize, and walked out before my anger turned into words I couldn't take back. The pawn shop sat 3 blocks down Main between the diner and the old VFW. The bell over the door jingled as I walked in. The man behind the counter looked up from a magazine. His hands were stained with oil and polish. "You, Henry?" he asked. I frowned. "Yeah." He reached under the counter and pulled out the Leica, resting it on a faded velvet pad like something sacred. "Guy said you might come for it. Told me to hold it a few days. It's a fine piece, mint condition." I ran my fingers over the cool metal, tracing the edge of the lens. The strap was gone, but the feel of it was the same. Solid, weighted, honest. "How much?" I asked. He named the price. It was more than I wanted to spend, less than what it was worth. I paid without blinking. As he wrapped the camera in paper, he paused. "You want me to toss the roll that's still in there? It's half shot." I looked up. "You mean there's film inside?" He nodded. "Yeah, looks old. Been in there a while." My throat tightened. My wife had loaded that roll the week she died. I'd never finished it. "No," I said quietly. "Don't toss it." I walked out into the afternoon light, the paper bag tucked against my chest. The air smelled like rain on dust, that scent that comes right before a storm. I sat in the truck for a long while, staring at the bag, wondering how something so small could carry so much weight. By the time I reached home, the driveway was empty. My son's truck was gone. I unlocked the front door and stepped into a silence that felt almost polite. I set the Leica on the table, unwrapped it carefully, and looked through the viewfinder. The house framed itself in soft blur. The hallway, the kitchen doorway, the empty chair across from mine. For a second, I could almost see her sitting there again, hair pinned up, laughing at how serious I always looked behind the lens. I blinked hard and closed the viewfinder. In the dim light, I noticed a small scratch on the base plate, fresh, bright against the old metal. The kind of scratch that comes from being dropped onto concrete. I traced it with my thumb, my pulse steady but slow. They hadn't just pawned it, they'd handled it carelessly. That was the part that broke me a little. Not the money, not the betrayal, the carelessness. I set the camera down and stared at it until the light faded out of the room. Later that night, I opened the drawer where I kept my wife's old photos. I picked one, her by the river, camera strap around her neck, sun in her eyes, and placed it beside the Leica. Tomorrow I'd take the film to be developed. I didn't know what it would show or why the thought made my stomach twist, but I knew I had to see. Because sometimes when the living lie to you, it's the dead who tell the truth. The morning after I got the camera back, the rain hadn't stopped. It fell steady against the porch roof, slow enough that it sounded like breathing. I made coffee and sat by the window, the Leica on the table in front of me, its black paint glinting in the gray light. I hadn't touched it since the night before. I was almost afraid to. The film inside wasn't just film. It was a message from a time I didn't remember sending. Around 9, I drove to the old photo lab 2 towns over. The big chain stores stopped developing film years ago, but this place still did. The sign said Martin's Camera and Film, half the letters burnt out. Inside, it smelled like chemicals and old cardboard. A young clerk behind the counter looked up, surprised to see anyone walk in before lunch. "Can I help you?" I handed her the Leica. "There's film in here. I'd like it developed." She nodded, opened the back carefully, pulled out the canister with gloved fingers. "Wow, this is real vintage stock. Haven't seen this brand in years." "Can you still run it?" I asked. She smiled. "If anyone can, it's Martin." She nodded toward the back room where an older man in a smudged apron worked under a red light. They promised it'd be ready in 2 hours. 2 hours. Long enough to drive home and stew. Long enough to remember. I sat in the truck outside the shop and looked at the rain running down the windshield. Each drop caught a small piece of light, blurring the world into streaks of silver. I thought about my wife, how she'd pause before every photo, taking in the moment before she pressed the shutter. "The camera doesn't just capture light," she used to say. "It captures truth, if you're patient enough to see it." Patience. That word tasted bitter now. At exactly noon, I went back. The clerk handed me a paper envelope still warm from the dryer. "It developed fine," she said, "but I don't think these are vacation pictures." Something in her tone made me pause. I paid, thanked her, and stepped outside before opening the envelope. The air was cool, the rain just a mist now. I slid the photos out slowly, 12 glossy rectangles. The first one nearly made me drop them. It was my son's truck, parked under the yellow glow of a streetlight, license plate clear, driver's door open. The timestamp in the corner said March 12th, the night before I'd noticed the missing withdrawals from my account. The second photo, a close-up of a hand passing a small envelope through the window. The next, the same truck parked behind a payday loan office. Then another. The hood of the truck reflected in a glass door marked Cash Today Loans. By the 5th frame, I knew what I was looking at. These weren't my wife's last photos, these were someone else's. Someone had used her camera recently, maybe days ago. Someone had finished the roll. And every picture seemed to point to one thing. Money. Quiet exchanges, hidden corners. The kind of business that leaves a man sleepless. I turned the photos over in my hands. Each one carried a faint chemical smell. Sharp, almost metallic, the kind of smell that pulls memory with it. In the last frame, there was a reflection in the truck's side mirror, blurry but unmistakable. My son's face, his eyes fixed on something out of frame, alert, maybe even nervous. The truth hit like cold water. He'd used her camera, my wife's camera, the one she'd carried like a second heart. He'd loaded it, driven around town and taken pictures of whatever he was tangled in, probably not realizing the film was still inside when he pawned it. I sat there for a long time, the envelope open on my lap. Cars passed, people walked, but none of it touched me. When I finally started the truck, I didn't drive home. Instead, I turned toward the river, the place where my wife used to take her best pictures, the place where the world still looked honest. I parked near the bridge, stepped out and leaned against the railing. The water moved slow and brown beneath me. I thought about the photos again, about what they meant. There were details in them only I would notice. Landmarks, storefronts, license numbers. Enough to build a pattern if I wanted to. And I did. Because this wasn't just about a camera anymore. It was about everything that came after. That evening I laid the photos out across my kitchen table. The house was quiet, my son hadn't come home yet. Under the lamp, the glossy surfaces caught the light like puzzle pieces. I took out a pen and my old shop ledger, the same notebook I used to track attendance and tool repairs, and began to write down what I saw. Dates, times, locations. I compared the timestamps with my bank statements. The match was exact. Withdrawals I hadn't made, dates that lined up perfectly with the nights those photos were taken. My jaw clenched as I traced one line to the next. Every detail pointed in one direction. My son hadn't pawned the camera by accident. He'd pawned it to cover something worse. Something that started long before he ever asked to move back in. By the time the clock hit midnight, I had a list of 6 transactions and 12 photos that proved what I already feared. Someone had been draining my account, someone I'd raised. I sat back in the chair, closed my eyes and listened to the sound of the rain easing off the roof. In the quiet, I could almost hear her voice again, patient, steady, reminding me to breathe before making the next cut. Measure twice. Cut once. I opened my eyes. I'd measured enough for one night. Tomorrow I'd start cutting. The morning after I saw the photos, the air felt different in the house. Still. Heavy. The kind of stillness that sits in the walls. I didn't make coffee. I didn't want the smell of it mixing with what was running through my head. I laid the prints back out across the table one by one under the soft yellow lamp. Each picture was sharper in daylight. Small details I hadn't noticed before. A trash bin in one corner. The reflection of a street sign in a car window. Little things that told me where each shot was taken. I circled them with a pencil and wrote the addresses in my ledger. Old habits from the shop came back. When something broke, you didn't guess. You traced the fault line until you found what failed. That's what I was doing now. Tracing. When the clock on the wall hit 9, I heard my son's boots on the stairs. He smelled like smoke and gasoline. He mumbled something about running late, eyes glued to his phone. "Morning," I said. He flinched a little at my voice. "Morning, Dad, you okay?" I nodded slowly, letting the pause hang. "Fine." He left without finishing his coffee. The door slammed harder than it needed to. When the truck pulled out, I exhaled. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I took out the camera and opened the back, making sure the spool was empty now. Then I put in a new roll. It wasn't nostalgia, it was control. I needed to feel like the camera was mine again. Not his, not anyone's. That afternoon I drove to the bank. The clerk at the window smiled politely like she did with everyone. I asked for a full transaction history printed and signed. She looked at the request, hesitated, then went to fetch a manager. They returned together, two sets of cautious eyes. "Everything all right, Mr. Henry?" "Just checking my books," I said. When the manager handed over the pages, I felt my stomach drop. 6 withdrawals in the last 2 months, all small enough to slip past suspicion, all done in person. I thanked them, left, and sat in the truck again with the engine off. I laid the bank sheets beside the photos on the passenger seat. It was all there, every pattern, every shadow, every route my son had taken. At home, I began scanning the photos. The flatbed scanner hummed like a soft machine of memory. Each image appeared on the screen, glowing with new sharpness. I saved them in a folder marked simply "Proof." Then I hid the originals. Not in a drawer, not in a box. Too obvious. I slid them inside the back cover of my old Bible, the one my wife used to read by the window. It still smelled faintly of cedar and dust. If anyone ever tried to search my things, they'd never think to look there. That night I ate dinner alone at the kitchen table. Soup from a can, bread I didn't finish. The sound of laughter drifted through the window from the neighbor's yard. It didn't reach me. After I washed the dishes, I took out my notebook again and began writing everything in order. March 12th, truck by the ATM, withdrawal, 400 a day to March 21st, payday loans office, withdrawal, 656 entries, 6 proofs. The page filled with numbers, but all I could see were the lines of trust slowly erased. At one point, I found myself whispering out loud, "You could have just asked, son." The words echoed back from the quiet walls. I went upstairs to my wife's old room. Her camera cases were still stacked in the closet, each one labeled in her handwriting. I sat down on the edge of the bed and opened the smallest one. Inside were lens cloths, film rolls, and a note I hadn't seen before. It was written on the back of a grocery receipt. "For Henry, keep seeing what's real." I don't remember her writing it, but her words steadied me. They reminded me why I wasn't going to shout or throw punches. I was going to see what was real, every last detail. When I went back downstairs, the house was dark except for the lamp over the table. I adjusted the camera on its tripod and aimed it at the front door. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. I set the timer for motion detection. If he came home late again, I wanted to know what time. If he tried to take anything else, I'd have proof. Before bed, I sat by the window for a while, watching the rain streak down the glass. It had started again, steady and thin. I thought about all the times my wife had waited for the perfect light, how she'd say, "The truth is patient, Henry. It waits for you to notice it." I whispered into the dark, "I'm noticing now." Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. I froze, listening. Just the house settling. Or maybe not. Either way, I kept the light on that night. The ledger lay open beside me, pages full of numbers, addresses, and ink that hadn't dried yet. And somewhere in that quiet, the truth kept breathing, patient, steady, waiting for morning. I didn't sleep much that night. The rain stopped sometime after midnight, leaving the air heavy with that clean after-storm quiet that always made the house feel emptier. I sat up until dawn with the ledger open, reading my own handwriting again and again, dates, numbers, times, until they stopped looking like numbers and started looking like a kind of confession. By 7, I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to beg my son to tell me the truth. I was going to find someone who would listen. The attorney's card had been sitting in my desk drawer for years. Her name was Margaret Fields, a woman who had handled the paperwork when my wife passed. She'd said then, "If you ever need help again, even just advice, you call me." So I did. Her office was downtown, tucked between a florist and a coffee shop. the kind of old brick building that still had radiators under the windows and faint dust in the air. When I walked in, the receptionist looked up and smiled politely. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" "No," I said. "But I used to, years ago. My name's Henry." Margaret came out herself a few minutes later. She looked exactly as I remembered, gray streak in her hair, reading glasses perched on her head, steady voice that didn't waste words. She shook my hand firmly. "Henry, it's good to see you. Come in." Her office smelled like lemon oil and paper. Family photos lined one wall. 2 grown kids, a golden retriever, a husband smiling like he'd earned every laugh he had. She gestured toward a chair. "So what brings you in?" I took a deep breath, reached into my coat, and placed the envelope of photographs on her desk. She glanced at it, then at me. "Go ahead." "It's my son," I said. The words felt foreign, heavy. "He pawned my wife's camera last week. I got it back, but the film inside, well, it wasn't mine, it was his. I had it developed." She opened the envelope slowly, careful not to smudge the prints. Her brow furrowed as she looked at the first few images. "That's your son's truck?" "Yes." She looked through the rest, then folded her hands. "These look like evidence of something. Do you know what's being exchanged here?" "Money. Envelopes, cash. I checked my bank statements. There are withdrawals I didn't make, matching the dates on those photos." Margaret didn't interrupt. She listened the way doctors listen to pain they already know the diagnosis for. When I finished, she sat back in her chair. "You did the right thing by documenting this and by coming here. What you're describing is financial exploitation, Henry. It's more common than people think, especially when families move back in together." I nodded, keeping my eyes on the floor. "I don't want him arrested. I just want my life back, my peace." She tapped her pen against the desk softly. "Let's start by securing what's yours. First, close any joint accounts. Set up new passwords for online access. I can help you draft a letter to the bank manager explaining the situation. Second, keep your documentation safe. Originals in one place, copies in another. And third, don't confront him yet, not until we've got something official on record." Her calm was like oxygen. Every instruction sounded like a board being nailed down on something that had been loose too long. "Can you do that today?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "All of it." She wrote a few more notes, then handed me a single sheet of paper. "Here's the number for an elder rights advocate I trust. They can walk you through local support if you need it. And Henry—" She paused, eyes softening. "I remember your wife. She was kind. You're honoring her by handling this with patience." I swallowed hard, nodded once, and stood. "Thank you." Outside, the morning had opened up. The sky was pale blue, the sidewalks still damp. I stood there for a long time, watching people move. Hands in pockets, coffee cups steaming, dogs tugging at leashes, everyone carrying something unseen. Back in the truck, I called the bank. They froze my old account within minutes. The manager sounded nervous, almost apologetic. "We'll issue you a new number, Mr. Henry. Your funds are secure now." When I got home, the driveway was empty again. My son's truck was gone. I went straight to my desk, took out the ledger, and added a new entry. May 4th, visited attorney. Filed documentation. Account secured. Each line steadied me a little more. That evening, I cooked dinner for myself, pork chops, mashed potatoes, and peas. The kind of meal my wife used to make on quiet Sundays. I ate slowly, letting the taste remind me that normal still existed. After washing the dishes, I walked into the living room and looked at the Leica on the table. I lifted it, feeling its weight settle in my palm. The lens caught the lamplight, reflecting a small circle of gold on the ceiling. That's when the sound came. A car pulling up outside, headlights spilling through the curtains. My son. The truck door slammed. Voices, his and hers. Angry whispers, low but sharp. Then the screen door creaked open. I stayed where I was, camera in hand. He walked in without knocking, eyes red, jaw tight. "Dad, we need to talk." I didn't move. "About what?" "You went to the bank today." "Yes." His hands clenched at his sides. "You froze the account. Do you have any idea what kind of mess that puts me in?" "I know exactly," I said. "It puts you in your mess, not mine." For a second I thought he might shout, but he didn't. He just shook his head, muttered something under his breath, and left again. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the frame. I stood there long after the engine faded down the street. My pulse was steady, almost too steady. I went to my desk and wrote another line in the ledger. May 4th, 8:46 p.m. Confrontation. No escalation. Recorded tone. Hostile. Then I put the pen down, switched off the lamp, and sat in the dark until my breathing matched the tick of the clock. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel lost. I felt ready. The house felt colder the next morning. I'm not sure if it was the weather or the silence left behind after the door slammed the night before. There's a kind of quiet that settles in after anger. A thin, sharp quiet that feels like the edge of something waiting to break. I moved through the kitchen slow, careful with every sound I made. The coffee pot gurgled, the toast popped. Outside, a gray sky pressed low against the windows. When I finally sat down, the chair across from me was still empty. It always was. I kept expecting to see her there, my wife, with that knowing look she used to give me when the world turned sideways. She'd wait until I calmed down, then say, "Henry, blood makes a family, but trust keeps it alive." I stared at that empty chair for a long time, thinking about those words. Then I heard the truck pull up. My son came in through the back door like he owned the place. His wife followed, standing just behind him, arms crossed tight. I didn't invite them to sit. He leaned on the counter, jaw set. "We can't live like this, Dad. You locking up your money, freezing accounts, treating me like a criminal. What's wrong with you?" I didn't raise my voice. "What's wrong is my life savings started disappearing the same time you moved in. What's wrong is I found proof of it." He glanced toward his wife, then back at me. "Proof? What proof?" I walked to the table, opened my ledger, and slid one of the photos toward him. It was the picture of his truck under the streetlight, the envelope in his hand. His face drained of color. "Where did you get that?" "Doesn't matter," I said. "I know what it is." He tried to laugh, but it came out thin. "You really think I'd steal from you? From Mom's memory?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence said it all. His wife shifted, her voice low but sharp. "You shouldn't be spying on your own family. That's sick." I met her eyes. "You sold what wasn't yours. That's theft. Don't talk to me about sick." The words hung in the air between us, heavy, final. He slammed his hand on the counter. "You're out of line, old man." "No," I said quietly. "I've been out of line for too long, letting things slide because you share my blood. That ends today." He took a step forward, but I didn't move. Years of teaching teenagers to respect the danger of power tools had given me a tone that stopped people cold. "You're not my father right now," he said through clenched teeth. "Maybe not," I replied. "But I'm still the man who built this house with his own hands. You'll treat it with respect until you're gone." His wife grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "Come on," she said. "This isn't worth it." He stared at me for a moment longer, jaw twitching, then turned and walked out. The screen door slammed again, rattling the windows. I waited until the truck engine faded, then let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. My hands were steady, but my chest ached. I went to the drawer where I kept the papers Margaret had given me. The eviction notice was already filled out, just waiting for a date. My handwriting looked strange, neater than usual, as if I'd written it with someone else's hand. I placed it on the table next to the ledger and the photographs. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like closing a door that should have been shut a long time ago. That afternoon, I drove to the hardware store. I bought new locks, a small fireproof safe, and a motion sensor for the hallway. The clerk, an old student of mine named Jake, carried the bags to the truck for me. "Everything okay, Mr. Henry?" he asked. "Just keeping busy," I said. He nodded. "That's good. Keeps the mind straight." Back home, I changed the locks before the sun went down. The sound of metal clicking into place was almost comforting. Every screw tightened, every hinge checked. It was the same rhythm I'd used in my workshop. Measure, adjust, secure. By dusk, the house was mine again. I made myself a simple dinner, sat at the table, and looked at the note my wife had left years ago. "Keep seeing what's real." Seeing what's real means facing it, even when it's blood. Later that night, I heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, careful. Then a soft knock. "Dad?" I didn't answer. The knock came again, louder this time. "Dad, please, I just want to talk." I stood by the door, hand resting on the knob, listening. His voice cracked, whether from anger or regret, I couldn't tell. Then it went quiet. After a minute, I heard the sound of paper sliding under the door. Footsteps retreating, the truck starting. I waited before picking up the paper. It was a folded sheet torn from a notebook. Inside, one sentence in shaky handwriting. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." I stared at it for a long while, feeling the weight of those words settle like dust. Then I placed the note in the ledger, right after the last entry. The line between blood and trust had been drawn. It wasn't straight. It wasn't clean. But it was there. Before bed, I checked the locks one more time, then sat in the dark living room, Leica resting in my hands. I looked through the viewfinder at the front door, the narrow beam of the porch light cutting across it. For a long time, I stayed like that, watching the frame, waiting for the next moment to reveal itself. Because that's what truth does, it waits. The next few days dragged by slow, like the hours themselves were afraid to move forward. The house was quieter now, but it wasn't peace, it was pressure. The kind that presses behind the eyes, the kind that builds in the chest when something's about to give. Every creak in the floorboards made me listen twice. Every car that slowed near the driveway pulled my gaze to the window. It's strange how quickly your own home can start to feel like a waiting room. I kept to my routine. Breakfast at 7, walk to the mailbox at 8, small repairs around the house through the day. I tried to pretend it was just another week, but I wasn't fooling anyone, least of all myself. One morning, the mail was scattered across the porch, half soaked in dew. I bent to pick it up, noticing one envelope was already torn open. My name was smudged, like someone's thumb had pressed against it too long. Inside was a notice from the bank, a failed attempt to access my closed account. The date was yesterday. Someone had tried again. I didn't need to guess who. I sat at the kitchen table, letter trembling slightly in my hand. Not from fear, just from the slow, steady current of anger I was trying to hold back. I took a breath, reached for my ledger, and wrote the date down. Every detail mattered now. That afternoon, I drove to the hardware store again and picked up a small motion sensor camera, one that connected to my phone. The young clerk showed me how to set it up. "You'll get a notification every time it detects movement," he said, tapping his finger on the screen. "You'll feel safer." "Safe," I muttered. "That'd be new." When I got home, I installed it above the front door, angled toward the driveway. The red light blinked once, then held steady. I tested it, walking back and forth, checking the feed on my phone. Perfect. By sunset, I'd locked every window and deadbolt in the house. Then I sat by the window with a book I didn't read, watching shadows move through the trees. Around 9, I saw headlights sweep across the wall. My pulse quickened. The feed on my phone blinked. Motion detected, 9:03 p.m. I opened the app. The image showed my son's truck pulling up quietly to the edge of the driveway. He got out, looked toward the house, then crouched near the mailbox. A flash of something metallic. Keys. A crowbar? I couldn't tell. Then he stood up again, hesitated, and got back in the truck. The feed ended there. I stared at the screen, the silence in the house suddenly too loud. He wasn't just angry anymore, he was desperate. The next morning I found the mailbox hanging open again. A few envelopes were missing, the kind the bank sends when they can't reach you online. I closed the box, locked it with a small padlock, and drove straight to Margaret's office. She listened carefully while I showed her the footage on my phone. Her face stayed calm, but her pen moved faster across her notepad. "This is escalation," she said. "He's testing boundaries. We'll file for an emergency protective order and notify the police about mail tampering. Keep your footage saved, and don't engage with him directly. If he comes back, you call me, no matter the hour." Her steadiness anchored me again. "He used to come to me for advice," I said quietly. "When he was little, he'd stand beside me in the shop and ask how to fix things." "Maybe that's the problem," she said softly. "You always fixed everything for him." I didn't answer. She wasn't wrong. When I left, I drove without direction for a while. Down side streets, past the diner where my wife and I used to sit for Sunday breakfast, past the hardware store, the post office, the river. Everything looked smaller now. Or maybe I was just seeing it for what it was. Back home, I sat at the workbench in the garage, running my fingers over the smooth grain of the cedar boards stacked against the wall. I hadn't built anything since she died. My tools were still sharp, still where I'd left them. I picked up a chisel, turned it in the light, and set it back down. The pressure behind my ribs tightened again. That night I left the living room light on and fell asleep in the chair. Sometime past midnight, the phone buzzed. Motion detected, 12:17 a.m. I opened the feed. My son was on the porch again, hood up, pacing. He bent down, slipped something under the door, and walked away. No knocking this time. I waited until the headlights disappeared down the road before I opened the door. Another note. Shorter this time. "You're ruining everything. Stop before you make me do something I can't take back." I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I folded the paper, slid it into the ledger, and wrote beneath the last entry. "Threat received. Documented. I didn't call him. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there until the sun came up, watching light move slowly across the floor." By morning, I'd made my decision. It was time to stop waiting. It was time to let the system notice. The morning I decided to call, the sky was the color of wet steel. A thin drizzle slicked the road, and the air smelled of metal and damp leaves. I sat by the window with the phone in my hand for a long time, thumb hovering over the number Margaret had written on her card. The silence in the house wasn't just quiet anymore. It was expectant, like the walls were waiting to hear what I'd do. I pressed the call button. A calm voice answered. "Office of Margaret Fields." "This is Henry," I said. "It's time." She didn't ask what I meant. "Stay where you are," she said. "I'll handle the paperwork. The police will come by today to collect a statement. You've already got the documentation. Just show them exactly what you've shown me." Her steadiness steadied me. I thanked her, hung up, and waited. Around 11, a cruiser pulled up. 2 officers stepped out. A woman about my son's age and an older man with a graying beard. They introduced themselves, kind but professional, and asked to come in. The younger one noticed the Leica sitting on the table and smiled faintly. "That's a beauty," she said. It was my wife's, I told her. She saw the world better than most. They nodded, then got to work. I showed them the notes in the ledger, the photographs, the video from the porch, the letters he'd left. They didn't rush me. The older officer took careful photos of the evidence, tagging each item with a small numbered card. The sound of the camera's shutter echoed soft through the house, a strange comfort. Order in the middle of chaos. When we were done, the younger officer asked, "Do you feel safe staying here tonight?" I thought about that for a moment. The walls, the doors, the locks I'd changed with my own hands. My wife's camera on the table, its glass eye catching a bit of light. "Safe enough," I said. "I just don't want to be looking over my shoulder in my own home anymore." They exchanged a look that said they understood. The older one handed me a card. "Here's your case number. A restraining order will be processed by end of day. If he contacts you or steps foot on this property, you call us immediately. We'll handle the rest." After they left, the house felt different again. Not quieter this time, lighter. Like the air had been scrubbed clean. By mid-afternoon, Margaret called back. "It's official," she said. "The order's in place. He's not allowed to contact you, visit, or access your accounts. You're protected, Henry. You did everything right." For a long moment, I couldn't answer. I just stared out the window at the rain streaking down the glass. "Protected," I repeated softly. The word didn't feel like victory. It felt like breathing after being underwater too long. But the pressure hadn't fully let go. That night I sat in the garage, hands resting on the old workbench. My tools hung on the pegboard, silent witnesses to years of fixing things that could be fixed. I ran a finger along the handle of a hammer I'd used since my first year teaching. The wood was worn smooth from time and touch. Measure twice, cut once. My wife's voice again, faint as a memory of light. I whispered into the still air. I measured this right. The next morning I got a call from the bank. The manager's voice was careful. "Mr. Henry, we wanted to confirm. You're aware of the attempted withdrawal yesterday evening?" My chest tightened. "Another one?" "Yes, sir. We flagged it automatically. Someone tried to use your old card number at an ATM on Greenway Avenue." I looked at the ledger open on my desk, the line from last week circled in red. Greenway of March 12th. The same location from the photographs, the same loop of streets my son had driven, the same ghosts replaying themselves. I thanked the manager, hung up, and called Margaret again. "He's still trying," I said. "We'll add that to the report," she replied. "At this point, it strengthens your case. If he violates the order, the police can act immediately." I nodded even though she couldn't see it. "He's unraveling," I said quietly. "I can feel it." "Then let the system handle it, Henry. That's what it's for." That night I didn't turn on the lights. I sat by the window again, watching the road. The motion sensor glowed faintly red above the door. Every few minutes headlights would pass, reflecting off the wet asphalt. Each time my pulse jumped and then eased when the lights faded. At 2:18 a.m. my phone buzzed. Motion detected, front porch. I opened the feed. It wasn't my son, it was a police cruiser. The officer stepped out, looked around, and left a paper taped to the door. In the morning light, I peeled it off. Proof of service. The restraining order had been officially delivered. The system had noticed. I set the paper down beside the Leica, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to sit back in the chair and just breathe. No plans, no lists, no calculations, just the sound of the house around me, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the old clock, the distant rhythm of rain. For the first time in a long while, the quiet didn't sound like danger. It sounded like relief. The courthouse sat at the end of a street lined with maples just beginning to bud. The branches arched overhead, pale green against a gray morning sky. I parked at the curb, shut off the engine, and sat for a moment with my hands resting on the steering wheel. The air inside the truck smelled faintly of sawdust and coffee. Familiar smells. Steady ones. I told myself this wasn't about punishment. It was about clarity. About ending the blur that had taken over my life. Inside, the hallways smelled of old paper and polish. Voices echoed down the marble corridor, low and uncertain. When I reached the courtroom door, Margaret was already there, a neat folder in her hands, her hair pulled back tight. She smiled when she saw me. "You ready?" "As I'll ever be," I said. We took seats near the front. The judge hadn't come in yet. Across the aisle, my son sat with his wife, both of them stiff and pale. He didn't look at me right away. When he finally did, it wasn't anger I saw this time. It was exhaustion, the kind that comes when you've run out of stories to tell yourself. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge entered, a woman with lines of fatigue carved deep into her face. She adjusted her glasses, glanced down at the file in front of her, then at me. "Mr. Henry," she said, "you're here regarding a restraining order and claims of financial exploitation, correct?" "Yes, ma'am." Margaret stood, steady and precise. "Your Honor, the evidence we're submitting includes photographs recovered from a pawned camera, financial records showing unauthorized withdrawals, and written communications in violation of the initial protective order." The judge nodded, motioning for her to proceed. Margaret laid out each photograph one by one on the evidence table. The images looked smaller under those bright fluorescent lights, less like memories and more like facts. Hard, undeniable. My son stared down at the floor as each picture was described. The room was so quiet that the sound of the bailiff's pen scratching notes seemed loud. When Margaret finished, the judge leaned back slightly, studying the timeline. Then she turned her gaze to my son. "Do you wish to respond?" He shifted in his seat, cleared his throat. "I made mistakes," he said. "Bad ones. But I never meant to hurt my father. Things got out of hand. I just wanted to get back on my feet." The judge's tone stayed even. "You withdrew money from an account that wasn't yours, pawned property that didn't belong to you, and violated an order instructing you not to approach this residence. That's more than a mistake. That's a pattern." He started to speak again, but she raised a hand. "You'll have the opportunity to make restitution. But I'm granting permanent protection for your father and full separation of assets. Any future contact will require counsel present." Margaret gave me a small nod. I didn't move. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp and final. It sounded almost like the crack of a hammer in my old workshop, sudden, decisive. When the session ended, my son stood but didn't leave right away. His wife touched his arm, trying to lead him out, but he lingered. Finally, he looked at me. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said quietly. "I really am. I wanted to believe him. Maybe a part of me did, but sorry doesn't unmake what's been broken, it only names the pieces." I gave a small nod, nothing more. He left without looking back. Outside, the day had cleared. The sunlight was sharp on the courthouse steps, bright enough that I had to squint. Margaret walked beside me in silence until we reached the parking lot. "You did well in there," she said finally. "You kept your composure." "I just told the truth," I said. "That's all I had left?" She smiled a little. "That's usually enough." I thanked her, shook her hand, and watched as she drove off. For a while, I stood there alone, the courthouse doors closing behind me, traffic murmuring on the street below. A few blocks away, church bells began to ring the noon hour. Each tone was clear and measured, steady as a heartbeat. When I got home, the house didn't feel haunted anymore. Just quiet, honest. The kind of quiet you earn. I set the court papers on the table next to the Leica. The lens caught a sliver of sunlight through the blinds and threw a small circle of light onto the wall. It shimmered there for a moment, fragile, fleeting, and then faded. For the first time since all this began, I didn't feel the weight pressing on my chest. I felt the lightness of something finished. I sat down with a pen and opened the ledger one last time. On a fresh page, I wrote a single line. May 27th, judgment rendered. Boundaries kept. Peace possible. Then I closed the book. The house creaked softly as it settled into the afternoon warmth. Outside, a breeze moved through the trees, whispering against the windows like something forgiving. Maybe peace isn't given to you. Maybe you build it piece by piece, boundary by boundary, until one day you look up and realize it's been there all along, waiting for you to notice. The morning after court, I woke before the alarm. Habit, I guess. Old teachers never stop waking early, even when there's nothing left to prepare for. The light in the kitchen had that gentle kind of warmth that belongs to early summer. The kind that softens everything it touches. The house was quiet again. Not the strained quiet of anger, but the peaceful kind that comes after a long storm finally breaks. I poured coffee and stood by the window, watching sunlight spill over the porch. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the need to glance at the motion sensor or check the feed on my phone. The papers on the table were still there. The court order, the receipts, the ledger. All neat and orderly, like a project completed. But the house itself, it still carried his shadow. Every creak in the floor, every scuff on the wall. I could still hear echoes of the nights when arguments lived here instead of laughter. I realized something then. Justice wasn't peace. It was just the start of it. To move forward, I had to let go. I called a real estate agent that afternoon, a woman named Claire who'd been in town longer than I had. Her voice was bright, efficient, kind. "It's a good time to sell," she said. "There's always someone looking for a solid house built right." "This house was built right," I told her. "Every board's got a story." 2 days later, she came by to take photos. She walked through each room quietly, snapping pictures of the hardwood floors, the sunlit kitchen, the old maple in the backyard that leaned just enough to make the lawn feel lived in. "You kept it up beautifully," she said. "Built it with my hands," I replied. "I suppose that's why it's hard to let it go." She nodded, understanding without asking for more. It's okay to let go too. After she left, I walked the house slowly, room by room. In the living room, I ran a hand over the arm of the old couch where my wife used to sit and read. The cushion was still worn from her favorite spot. I whispered a quiet thank you to the space she once filled. In the hallway, I stopped at the framed photographs we'd hung decades ago, her standing in front of the first house we'd ever bought, me behind the camera pretending to know what I was doing. I smiled at the memory and took the picture down carefully. It would come with me, wherever I went. The last room was my workshop. The smell of cedar and oil hit me the moment I stepped inside. Dust motes floated in the sunlight like little ghosts of all the things I'd built and never finished. I ran my hand along the workbench. Smooth from years of use, every dent a story. There was the first hammer I ever bought, the tape measure I used when I built this house from the ground up, and beside them the Leica, gleaming under the light. I lifted it gently, feeling the cool metal in my hand. "You've seen too much," I whispered, "but you've told me what I needed to know." That evening I sat on the porch and watched the sunset burn through the trees. The air smelled like cut grass and honeysuckle. Somewhere down the block, kids were riding their bikes, their laughter cutting through the quiet like bird song. For a moment I imagined her sitting next to me again. My wife, her hand on my arm, that faint smile that always meant she'd already figured out what I was struggling to say. "I'm selling the house," I said softly into the air. "But I'm not leaving you behind." A breeze moved across the porch then, warm and light. Maybe it was nothing more than wind through the trees. But it felt like approval. By the end of the week, the house was listed. Claire called the next morning. "We already have an offer," she said. "A young couple. First home. They love the craftsmanship." "Good," I said, and I meant it. The closing came quickly. I signed my name more times than I could count, each stroke of the pen feeling lighter than the one before. When the final document was done, I handed over the keys. Walking out that door for the last time, I paused on the porch. The maple leaves rustled above, scattering specks of sunlight across the steps. I turned back to the house and smiled. "You did your job," I murmured. "You held us even when we didn't deserve it." Then I walked to the truck, the Leica in my bag and a single photograph in my pocket. My wife standing in the yard, camera in hand, sunlight behind her. The road stretched wide and open ahead. Letting go wasn't about losing what mattered, it was about making space for what came next. The new place sits on the edge of town, near the lake where the air always smells like pine and rain. It isn't big, just 2 rooms above an old woodworking co-op. But it's enough. I can hear the hum of saws below during the day, the soft rhythm of work I know by heart. It's a kind of music. The first morning after I moved in, I unpacked only 3 things: my tools, the photo of my wife, and the Leica. Everything else could wait. I hung the photograph above the workbench. She's standing in sunlight, hair pulled back, one hand shading her eyes. Every time I look at it, I remember how she'd tilt her head when she framed a shot, like she was trying to see the world's secret before it disappeared. I built her a frame that afternoon. Walnut, dovetailed corners sanded smooth until it felt like silk. When I finished, I set the Leica inside a shadow box made from the same wood and mounted it beside her picture. Side by side again, the 2 things that had carried her eye and her heart. By evening, the sky outside was turning that soft shade of gold that belongs only to quiet endings. The co-op below was empty. The smell of sawdust still drifted through the open window. I sat by it with a mug of coffee and watched the reflection of the water catch the last light. It's strange how grief changes shape. At first it's loud, all noise and weight. And then one day you wake up and it's something softer, like a whisper you carry with you instead of a stone in your chest. Most weekends, the co-op opens its doors to the neighborhood kids. They come in carrying scraps of wood and too much energy, asking how to make birdhouses or picture frames or little boxes with secret drawers. I volunteer there now. When they ask what makes a good carpenter, I tell them it isn't the strength in your hands. It's the patience to listen to the wood. I show them how every board has its own grain, its own story. How if you force it, it splits, but if you follow it, it holds forever. One boy, small with freckles and a laugh that fills the whole room, asked me last week why I keep an old camera that doesn't work. I smiled. "Because it helped me see what I didn't want to," I said. "And sometimes that's what saves you." He nodded like he understood, even if he didn't yet. Some nights I still think about my son. I don't hate him. I'm not sure I could if I tried. Hate takes too much space, and I've finally cleared enough of that out to breathe. Margaret sent me a letter a few weeks ago, said the restitution payments have started coming in. I haven't opened the envelope. It's not the money that mattered. It never was. Sometimes I imagine him somewhere far from here, working, trying again. Maybe he remembers what I taught him, about measuring twice, about steady hands, about taking care of the things you're trusted with. Maybe he'll learn patience too in his own time. At night, when the town quiets and the lake turns to glass, I take the little point-and-shoot camera I bought and walk down to the dock. I take pictures of the reflections. Light caught in ripples, clouds folded in the water. None of them ever come out perfect. That's all right. Imperfection feels honest. The Leica stays on the wall now, sealed in its frame. It's not an heirloom anymore. It's a lesson, a reminder that the truth, no matter how long it's hidden, always develops in the end. When I turn out the lights, the street lamp outside catches the glass of the frame, and for a moment the lens flashes, just once, like an eye still open. I whisper goodnight to her, to the house that isn't mine anymore, to the years that led here. Then I breathe, deep, quiet, steady. Because this is what freedom sounds like. It sounds like nothing at all. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon, so you never miss the next story that touches the heart and reminds us what truly matters. Family, truth, and the strength to let go.